Most bankers aren't ready to help you until after their third cup of coffee. But with Central National Bank's after-hours service, you don't have to wait for the bank lobby to open to get help. You can contact us from 6 to 8:30 in the morning or from 5 to 10 in the evening, and we'll connect you to a real, live, local person who can answer questions and fix problems 7 days a week. Bank different. Bank Central. Central National Bank. Member FDIC.
Marc Effron is 15 years sober, and he started Legacy Healing Center, which is now all over America. It started with a dream. It actually started with a hopeless Marc Effron in a treatment center trying to figure out what he could do to move forward in his life and recovery, and ultimately seeing a space in recovery where he could fill a void and help others on the road to happy destiny. This dude is the real deal. We talk about really good recovery stuff that includes him getting extremely vulnerable about things that he's experienced in recovery. And it was one of those deals, if you know recovery, when you're talking to somebody and it's almost like there's a crystallization around them. And it's like as much as a white light experience as I get in today's world for me, when somebody's being that vulnerable and that honest, and I feel inspired and moved to do the right stuff in my life, it feels pretty good. And that's what Marc made me feel. And I think he'll make you guys feel the same thing. You're not hopeless. You're not alone. And Marc does a great job of confirming that. But first, Kevin Susan. So I'm going to talk to you about your life. That's the idea behind this podcast, Marc, is I want people to have an idea of recovery and the inspiration, the stories like guys like you about what it was like and now what it's like on the other side. And just like, following you, researching you, there's a lot to like, and there's a lot to enjoy about what you're putting out there. With Legacy Healing and with all the other things you're doing. And I get on meetings now, or I go to meetings now, 12-step meetings, and you got people who just are crawling in who really have a tough time identifying with what it will be like on the other side. And a guy like you, now you just had, we were talking about it offline, but 15 years, April 3rd.
Yeah.
So we remember your sobriety date. What was that first time? I know you grew up in a family where your real dad wasn't around, but your blood father, your stepfather and your mom get divorced. When do you take that first drink amidst all that? What I'm assuming to be somewhat chaotic upbringing.
It's wild. First of all, good. That's some good intel. That's some good recon.
Yeah, that's my job, man.
No, man, I appreciate it, because I stepped into this in full faith, not knowing what I was walking into with you.
Uh-huh.
But I did a little bit of research myself, so it was good. So let me answer the question. So yeah, I mean, I grew up outside Boston in Swampscott, Mass, and I came from a split family. So when my mother got remarried, right before that is when I actually had my first drink. I had this liquor cabinet in our living room in Swampscott, where you pull down this little drawer, and in there were all the bottles, but there was one bottle that was in a purple bag, and a purple, velvety bag. And it looked attractive to me. And I took my first sip, and that was around 8.5, 9, and I think about that because I have an 8.5-year-old son. I'm thinking about, what if Max went into the liquor cabinet and started drinking? So I don't even know what attracted me to that, but that was the first time that I ingested alcohol, and I felt like, this is unbelievable to me. This is the feeling that I've, been craving, because I had this massive hole. I had this massive hole since I was 2.
Yeah.
The first time I actually had drugs in my system was in 1978, when the blizzard of 78 blew through New England. And my mother came into the closet. There was a lot of people in the house. And I don't know the story like in my memory, but it's been told to me by aunts and by uncles that my mother came into the closet, and I pulled out all the dresser drawers and climbed up to the top shelf and grabbed the bag of cocaine. And when she found me, I was in the corner of the closet with my little Lammy, my little stuffed animal, and I was rubbing cocaine on my Lammy, and it was all over me. And back then, man, like DCF wasn't showing up and pull you out of the house. I went to the hospital, I got cleared. So it started at that age, and then by 8.5, turning 9 was that first time I had a drink.
You grew up, obviously your mom was, from what I can tell, at least now, recreationally using drugs. Was that, by the way, how old were you when that happened, when you were up on the top drawer?
I was just over 2.
Okay.
2.5.
Yeah. By the way, so did you go to Swampscott High?
I did.
You're another.
Well, I went to junior high and then I left.
Okay.
But I grew up with all those kids. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so I went to Richmond with Todd McShay. I knew Todd Klein, Peter Woodfork, Dave Portnoy. You guys are all like uber successful. I don't know what was in the water out there, but eventually
it was good water in the early 80s in Swampscott.
Yeah.
All those guys, Pete Woodfork, Traeger DePietro.
Yeah, Traeger DePietro, yeah.
John Schlafman, Portnoy, all those guys I grew up with, yeah.
Good dudes. I mean, people always say, because Todd and I lived together, and they're like, what was Dave Portnoy like? He's a good guy, opinionated, feisty, but, a good guy. And you could tell he was passionate about stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. He was passionate then, yeah. We all did we played baseball together, football, summer camp. It was, Swampscott was great growing up there. Where I live now, Parkland, Florida, is a lot like Swampscott.
Yeah.
It's a small community, not a lot of businesses, just families and sports. And it's wild, man. I'm 40, I'm going to be 47 this year. I'm 46. And if you told me this would be my life through sobriety, I never would have believed it.
What would be the hardest thing to believe, you think?
That I could take a sober breath.
Yeah.
It was at the end of my addiction. I left Swampscott going into my junior high years, went up to New Hampshire and slowly migrated south. And I came down to South Florida and finished out high school down here. And I swore I would never come back to Florida. I mean, it chewed me up and spit me out because my addiction in high school years really started to run rampant. When I went back to Boston at 19 is when I got into finance. So I thought, that was just kind of like a time frame of my life. It was just going to pass. But you put a little money in an alcoholic or a drug addict's body.
Yeah.
So, taking a sober breath was a hard thing because I ended up homeless on the street, in and out of treatments. My credit score read below 200.
I get it. I totally get it.
Yeah.
But before, let's go backwards a little bit. You're growing up in
Sure.
Swampscott. You take that first drink. I'm assuming it's Crown Royal. You mentioned that, and your story is very similar to mine in a sense that sports filled that hole within you early on. Whatever it was about sports participation, the rush, whatever. Same for me. That filled that hole. As you continue to progress, did you notice that alcohol and drugs sort of took over? I mean, the moment I started, women came into my life, girls at the time, and alcohol and drugs, that's all I cared about. Those were my two number one things. And I was a little kid who was obsessed with sports. And that just kind of got left in the wake of the drugs and the other bullshit. Is that similar to what happened to you?
Spot on.
Yeah.
And we now as adult men call that romance finance because that stuff doesn't necessarily I go to a Monday night meeting. We talk about that romance finance. Yeah, man, that's what it was. It was women or like you said, girls at the time interested, it fulfilled that void. It gave me the validation. Alcohol was the lubricant that allowed me to be or feel like Superman at the time. And I didn't know how reckless it really was. And that carried on. So it was like the young 9, 10, 11, sneaking into the woods, drinking the beer, stealing it from the parents, the holidays, into the high school years where it started to get a little wild and reckless,
You talked about the fact that, your divorce, I've read, hit you kind of hard on an emotional level, which I believe, I'm my parents' marriage was not perfect, but they stayed together. So I don't know what it's like to be, a child of divorce. But I talk to people now who are vulnerable about it, and they say that, it did impact them. For you, as a budding alcoholic drug addict, how did that, how did that hit you with all of the evolution that you've done and all the knowledge that you have now and the resources? How did that affect a young Marc Effron?
Yeah. Some great questions so far, but that's a really good one, man, because there's layers to that. Whether I think the first was like unrealized trauma. Being a drug addict or an alcoholic, what I've learned today is that in itself is a traumatic experience, let alone what happens. Looking back, coming from a divorced family, I learned things from what I saw, from what I heard, what I learned to repeat that created these mental patterns, these belief systems that I came to believe to be my truths. This is how you speak to a woman. This, disrespectfully. It's okay to cheat. Like these, what I thought was acceptable because I saw it or I heard it. And I don't believe that my parents intentionally lived this way. Nope, I don't think any parent does.
Yeah.
Being a parent now, we want what's best for our child, but we do the best that we can with the information that we have at the time. And I look back at the 80s and I think about what my parents went through and the struggles. Yeah, I grew up in a great town, but it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy for my dad and my mother. So it was the learned behavior, to answer your specific question. And it came in so many different forms, which is what I mean by layers. So as an adult, especially getting sober, and I don't want to keep going back and forth, but I can compare it. There was a lot to unwind.
Yeah.
Because sobriety is not about, at least for me and what I've been taught by the guys that came before me, it's not about putting down the drink or the drug. That's the physical sobriety. It's the emotional sobriety. That's what keeps people here short-term, long-term, and then really long-term.
Yeah.
And without that emotional sobriety, we're shot. So we got to unwind all this learned behavior from childhood. And there was a truckload for me to unpack,
And now as all this stuff is becoming a part of who you are and who your life, you're learning this behavior, you're continuing with alcohol and drugs. What did that look like as you get in your formative years, your high school years? How much are you drinking? What kind of drugs are you doing? And, was it fun? For me, it was fun until it wasn't. What was your experience like around this stuff?
Oh, it was fun. Yeah. And then it was really fun. Then it was loads of fun. Then the problems came in.
Yeah.
And then it was just problematic. I think my first major consequence, I moved out of Swampscott, moved with my mother and my stepfather to New Hampshire. I was in junior high and, I went from like a great town, great friends to 9 acres in the woods, on a mountain. And this girl gave me some homemade Kahlua. And I was hanging out with the guys and we're in the woods and we're drinking this Kahlua. And we go for a walk around Mascoma Valley Lake. Never forget it. And as we're making the bend, we hear fire engines. And I look up and the woods were on fire. We burned, I don't know how many acres down. Nobody got hurt, but that was my first major consequence of alcohol. We had like a little campfire and a can of butane blew up and I had to go to the police station and I had to have those consequences. And you're 13, 14 years old. You're scared shitless. You don't know what's going to happen, and I'm being told that I'm a delinquent. So now the messaging begins. So it's like, what was that like? It was fun. I had a good time. Then I got some consequences. That's not where the consequences stopped for me, though. I mean, this thing took me to the pits of hell.
But you were successful. Like, how did you put together this career in finance? As a young guy, you mentioned you're still in your teens when you start to get rocking and rolling. Was it just kind of play hard, work hard, that this is what it is? Did you kind of feel like that came together? You're working your ass off and you're making money. Why can't you hang out and do that? get fucked up.
Yeah, no, listen, I that's exactly what it was, and through junior high into high school, like I played around with the sports. I wound up moving back down to South Florida to Parkland to play baseball. And there was some studs that year.
I bet.
Mike Caruso was on that team. If you know that name, he was picked up by the White Sox, starting shortstop, most valuable player that year of the rookie group. And, that was like my competition, yet I'm partying. I had no shot.
And this is in Parkland High, or?
Yeah, I wound up coming back down to Marjorie Stoneman Douglas.
Okay.
And that was that year. And I'll tell you what ended up happening was I wound up dropping out of high school. And that's when like all that partying. So I want to answer your question.
Yeah,
like right before I got into finance, my scorecard started to read 0. You asked me like, did drugs and alcohol take over the sports? And it did for me. I was a really good athlete. And there was a lot of disciplines that I had learned along the way. Without that, I probably would have been dead for sure.
Yeah.
19 years old, my dad came to me. He's like, what are you doing? You got to get the fuck out of here. You got to go back to Boston. Your brother's in finance. You're going to rent a room in his apartment and you're going to look for a job. And I started waiting tables and I took interviews. I went to every major financial institution. I went to MFS, Putnam. I went to John Hancock. You name it in Boston, I went to it. Most of the people laughed at me and said, yeah, man, you don't have a degree. You're not ready. But
let's face it, you're a hustler. You're a born hustler from what I can take from this. Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah.
I like to win, winners, hate losing more than they like winning because they expect to win. And I definitely feel like that's part of my DNA that I've been blessed with. And it's paid off dividends for me, later in life. But back then, man, I was getting no's left and right. And I had a guy that took a chance on me. So I'm 19, I'm working at Investors Capital in Linfield, Mass. And I followed that CEO and the president around. And that's when the martini lunches came in, the strip clubs came in, money came in, and they taught me how to be a gentleman drinker by day and by night and get shit done. And I never hurt anybody, except for myself. And by the time I was 24, I was the vice president of an insurance company. It happened quick for me. And I made a truckload of money. Interest rates were wild then. And it was literally like, I just had to show up. I had to show up to Merrill Lynch or Morgan Stanley or Smith Barney and tell a really competitive story. And guys would give me money and invest it with the company that I was with. And it was a lot of fun. I said, damn, I'm really good at this thing.
Yeah.
So let me go to the strip club.
Yeah.
Let me womanize a little bit.
Which is, by the way, we talk about athletics and, the divorce, the culture you grew up in, or the situations, the learned behavior, that is a part of that lifestyle too, a lot of times in finance, right? I mean, you're kind of going hard, as hard as you're working, you're entertaining clients, you're going out, you're doing those lunches, you have the late nights. And for you, was that sort of a part of the package? Like, okay, this, you're not going home by yourself and snorting an 8-ball. There's a glamorous side to this almost, at first at least.
100%. That's exactly what it was. I could afford it and people wanted to be around me. So I didn't feel alone, which is what most addicts feel like. And the disease of addiction wants us isolated. It wants us alone. It wants to kill us. At least it does for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was part of the package. And you're right. I didn't start off alone. I always started off with a lot of people until it was just maybe me and a woman. And then I just was up for 72 hours snorting cocaine, blowing a hole in my nose. It was like that. It was extreme because that's all that I knew. I knew all in or all out. It was fight or flight, hit or miss. It was like, I was going to try to hit. I was trying to hit.
How are you going into work? How are you, as it starts to get ugly, right? As it starts to take a turn. I mean, for me, it was just like you said, I don't care how much success you're having, you show up into work having not slept for like 3 days. There's some point where for me, it would be like, wow, like this is getting kind of crazy. Like I either need a drink or some more blow, or I need to get out of here, or maybe I can try to gut it through. But it's just, it had become a monster. When did that start to turn for you and you start to head on that slope down where you mentioned ends up with you being homeless?
So
was there a seminal moment or a moment you could pinpoint?
yeah, because there's two moments. And I know we don't have a truckload of time, but I'll break it down in two parts.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was living in Atlanta, Georgia. I had gotten that big boy job and made all that money for a few years, and I wasn't showing up anymore. So my production started to show, and my boss at the time, my divisional manager, showed up to travel with me. He got off the plane. I picked him up at the airport. I've been up for 72 hours, taking a bunch of Xanax to try to calm down. I looked like, hell. He took one look at me and he said, "You're done," and started walking away. And I teed off on him. And this is an important part because we're both in recovery. That same guy that fired me, and I said, "Don't you fucking know who I am? I'm Marc Effron, and my father and my brother and you're done." Like full flight from reality.
Yes. Yeah.
I had the gift to make an amends to that man 6 years when I was 6 years sober, only to find out that he had been sober close to 20 years at the time. God's been looking out for me this entire journey, so he put that guy in my life to help set a bottom.
Well, and that's the thing. People don't look. Consequences are a huge part of my recovery, right? What started as me being able to get by on a wink and a handshake, and a smile, eventually the jig was up and people were like, "You're done," just like you. And that led to me basically, homeless, probably. Yeah. I mean, I was back living with my parents in my early 30s after having success. Yeah. I mean, I was toast. And it was thanks to those people who said, "It's enough, dude. It's enough."
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you hit this bottom, or no, tell the other story. Were you going to touch on the other story?
So I did what most alcoholics do is I packed up my stuff, left Atlanta, started driving to Florida, called another company, the Hartford, which is a big insurance company. And I called their manager. I said, "Hey, Jeff, it's Effron. I'm driving down to Florida. I'm done with this other company. I don't believe in what they're doing. If you ever have a spot for me, I'd love to come work for you." And he said, "Actually, we do. Why don't you meet me at such time?" So I wound up getting employment immediately.
And that's trouble. That's happened to me a couple of times. See, you fall ass backwards into more opportunities and it just kind of keeps it rolling, right?
Yeah, because I wasn't mature enough or ready to handle it. I had proven that I could start at 24, land a job and execute, do a good job, but drugs and alcohol took over. So what ended up happening was I was working at Hartford, and this is the second story, is I was doing a good job. And then these hurricanes crisscrossed down here in Florida, and power was out, brokerage firms were done, and I had 3 weeks off, and I wound up getting loaded, and the wheels came off again. And there was one financial advisor, Jeff Eagle, and he worked for Morgan Stanley, Smith Barney at the time, Smith Barney. And I would cancel on him and cancel on him and cancel on him. And he would always reschedule a meeting with me. So one time I actually canceled, he rescheduled, and I showed up, and he sat me down and shut the door. He said, "Listen, I buried my son to a drug overdose. You have a serious problem. You need to go get help. I kept on taking these meetings because I thought maybe something would change with you because I like you and you're really great at what you do. But I can't see you and I won't take another meeting with you until you're sober. Go get some help." And that was the moment that I wound up going into treatment. It's not the moment I got sober. That was 2006. I wound up going into my first treatment facility. And I put 6 months of sobriety together. I didn't know how much work I was going to actually have to do. I wasn't ready.
Yeah, so that's me too.
Yeah. I didn't know.
Yeah.
And so I tried more controlled drinking, and that bottom kept on getting deeper until I got arrested. And, and the woman that I was with, who's now my wife, she had left me. She was my girlfriend at the time. So she left, the job left, the car got repoed, the house was gone, bank accounts were sucked dry. And my scorecard read 0. I lost. I just wasn't dead yet. And that was the beginning of my journey.
The gift of desperation.
Oof. Yeah.
And by the way, I will get to this later on, and I won't keep you forever. But I love a good love story too. That's great that you're with this woman at the time who's now your wife, who is like, hey, no mas. She's out of here too because she can't. As much as these people love us, it's just at some point, everybody's got to protect themselves. And that's another consequence. So when did you discover that you were willing to go to any lengths, and what did that look like for you?
I feel like if I'm real honest with self, which is to thy own self be true, that's what we say, right? The willingness, it was more desperation and embarrassment and like, shit, I got no place to go but try to get help. Then along the way, like weeks and months into it, I saw these guys, they were happy. They were joyous. They were free. They were like good guys talking about something I knew nothing about, which was God. And I said, man, this is really attractive to me. So it was more of a moment of like, these people are living the way that I always wanted to live. That's attractive to me. And I think that's where the willingness came in for me. I didn't want to be sober. At the end, I'm in a motel because I couldn't stay at the Ritz anymore because I couldn't afford it. And that's where I started. I ended up in a Motel 6, peeping out the windows and the blinds,
Who's out there? Yeah.
Who's out there?
Yeah.
I got chairs bolted up against the door. I'm pissing I said I prayed before we started speaking. I said, I'm going to let it all rip. And, I'm like peeing in a bush, like like a fake plant. Like I literally was barricaded in full flight from reality. So when I get to a fellowship and I see these men that maybe don't look like me, sound like me, talk like me, but they're happy. Mm-hmm. They have this way about them, this light in their eye. The willingness was like an evolution for me. It took course.
I see that as like a window in your soul, or the window opening up, because the same thing for me. And, we can kind of speak athletics in a sense where when you're on a team and you're willing to do whatever it takes to win, the personalities that surround you really don't matter anymore. And that's how I was with recovery. When I wasn't ready to really rev it up and give it all I had, I could find this person. That's not like me. That's not like me. Somebody's talking about God. I'm out of here. But the moment I was really ready, everybody's role kind of made sense. And it's a magical thing that you're talking about when you establish that within yourself in recovery. Like, okay, like what you just said, these people are different than me, but I feel great, and it's obvious that they're happy.
100%. There was a guy, Armin Zaytunian. He said, practice identifying, not comparing. I was like, what is this guy talking about? Or another guy says, hey, Mark, the diseases of addiction will even come in the form of a child. What is this guy talking about? They were talking a different language. So you're right. It's like I had guys that I could talk to money about on my team. I had guys that could relate. I had guys that could talk to me about how to interact with a woman. I had another guy talking to me, hey, man, if you can't safely use porn, you probably shouldn't pick it up. Hey, we don't go to strip clubs because God doesn't live there. We don't judge people that do, but this is not what we do. And these are the guys that I'm hanging out with. I'm like, this is just polar opposite of anything I know.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm good.
Yeah.
God had a plan, and, and I'm definitely not rendered white as snow. And that's also part of my story.
Yeah.
I walked through a lot of trials and tribulations in sobriety and not gotten high or drunk over it.
What's the toughest thing you've been through in sobriety that you were able to just kind of use God or the fellowship to get through and make it to the other side? Because what happens is when we do that, in my experience, now we've got another story to share to help somebody else. It certainly doesn't feel like that at the time. But if you could pinpoint one thing that you're comfortable talking about, as I see that wry smile.
Yeah, man, it's time. It's time for me because, Man, I hired a personal development coach. I meet with him every Wednesday at 11. His name is Chris. He's unbelievable. And we talk about this. We talk about the little excuses that we tell ourselves as human beings. And when we remove the word excuse as an option, it's no longer an option. And I have to allow myself to be authentically me because that's the only person I know how to be, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I've walked through a few things. I mean, I've been arrested in sobriety, wrong place, wrong time, doing a transport. All those charges were dropped. That was embarrassing. That was shameful. I thought it was going to affect my business, my children and their school. It didn't. I mean, there was haters. And that's what it was, you know, but all the charges were dropped and it was cleared of it. But that was a tough moment.
Yeah.
The hardest thing that I've had to walk through was the double betrayal between my wife and I. And I am comfortable, and I get it. You know, I have no idea who's going to see this. And I think it's great that I'm able to share it, because if you gave me a pen and a piece of paper and you said, hey, Effron, what are the top 5 things? You're 30 days sober, right? What are the top 5 things you think you're going to relapse over? 3 out of the top 5 happened to me within a 2-year period. And I didn't drink over it. So I had an affair. I cheated on my wife. That affair lasted for 6 months, and I was caught, and I felt like a sham. I felt like the guy that was talking about God, talking about the steps, had sponsees and a sponsor and speaking at meetings and mentoring. Like, that guy was a sham, until I realized that I was just a human being.
Yeah, I'm thinking that guy's human.
Yeah, he's human. And I got to that place, and I wound up going to a men's retreat and falling in love with a deeper relationship with the Lord, and begged for forgiveness, and was granted that forgiveness, only to find out that my wife had an affair that lasted for a year after mine. That was the hardest thing that I ever had to walk through. So I packed up my shit and moved out of my home, filed for divorce, separated, filed for divorce, served the papers, had a full-blown relationship after that. And I'm out of my home for a year, and I'm still showing up for my kids. I'm showing up to AA. I'm showing up to a fellowship of men and women helping each other. I'm showing up and trying to be the best dude that I could.
Yeah.
I got a lot of people that work for me. You know, I lost 30 pounds in 6 weeks. I was curled up in the fetal position, 11 years sober, wanting to blow my brains out, thinking about my wife with another human being. And here's what happened was it triggered all this bullshit to when I was a kid. And all the women, and I can start in Swampscott, all the different girls that cheated on me, straight through. Every single woman in my life had cheated on me, including now my wife. In that question as a man that not a lot of men want to admit, but I don't give a shit. It's real. It's like, what does that say about me? What type of man am I? And I started having these like deep, dark thoughts, sober. And I isolated for about 60 days. It was really hard for me to show up. And then I blasted off, man. And I got going and I got working and I got back involved with my fellowship and giving back and service and faith, and got close to my pastor. And, you know, I'm a Jewish kid from Swampscott who now is a practicing Christian. I don't even know how that works, but it works, and it works right for me. Man, I'm sitting in this house. I'm in this big house in Parkland. My wife, or soon to be ex-wife, is down the street with my kids. It's a Saturday. I just thought I had like one of the most amazing days. And I'm in the pool in the backyard just crying. And I said, man, like, you know, this is what my parents put me through. Mm. My kids didn't ask for this. They didn't ask for their mom and their dad to do something stupid. They were born into that. And then now they've got all these learned behaviors, and what am I putting on my kids? And I said, man, if God blessed me with the gift of sobriety, then he gave me this pocket of time of 8 to 9 years to create this amazing life, to be able to repair financially, emotionally, to grow spiritually, with the woman that he introduced me to, all this was built. I felt like I was going against God, is the best way that I can describe it. So I removed the filing of divorce. I stepped in. Now, man, I wanted to retaliate.
Yeah.
Like, I wanted to buy this guy's apartment building just so I could evict him. I wanted to do crazy, wild stuff. I mean, I went bananas, and I didn't do any of it. What I did do was I dug in, and I accepted the situation for what it was, the best that I could at the time. And it's been 3.5 years now since reconciliation. There's been a lot of trauma therapy. There's been a lot of couple stuff. I now have a coach. I went through primary trauma therapy. Like I said earlier, love to win more than I hate to lose. Like, I just want to win. I love winning. And I couldn't see it, man. At that time when you're betrayed and you have kids and drinking or drugs or suicide seemed like an option to be where I am today, I'm extremely grateful. And it's not perfect. And it's a work in progress.
Dude, anybody that's listening to this or seeing this, I mean, that, I'm no guru, but that's how it's done. And this is why I for you to on paper, you're this macho guy with this great success. And for real, no. So for guys like you to be vulnerable like that, because again, in my experience, what you're talking about is normal shit. The fact that you're talking about it is abnormal as far as a lot of times society sees it. And that's what we do is you open yourself up within the rooms, right, of recovery and to other men. I mean, dude, that story makes me feel so much better about some of the crazy shit that's happened to me, some of the thoughts I've had. I can remember calling my sponsor after breaking up with a girlfriend, like, I can't stop thinking about her having sex with another guy, and it was like, I just couldn't stop, and that train has left the station, and, he talks me through that, and I don't do anything. I think crazy. I don't act crazy. And that is one of the best parts about working a program, right? Is that you put yourself out there so those crazy thoughts don't become crazy actions. So Marc's not buying a fucking apartment building so he can kick somebody out. It's
pretty awesome idea, though.
Yeah, it's a great fucking idea. Yeah.
I appreciate the kind words, man.
Yeah.
I mean, in order to be, in full disclosure, it's like you got to have transparency in order to be vulnerable. Those two things go hand in hand.
Yeah.
And I feel now, I didn't feel at the time, I felt like it was the worst thing that ever happened to me. Like my heart was ripped out, squeezed, stepped on, stabbed, then put back in. And I would look at wedding pictures and I would look at my kids and I'd just be like, you lying. The messaging, the belief systems, I said it earlier in the beginning of the talk. I had these belief systems as a kid. Then I'm hit with this thing as an adult, which triggers all of it. And I had to literally, I developed anxiety, panic disorders, things that I couldn't get on a plane, things that affected me for a good solid 1.5 years. I'm talking literally, I would get on a plane, sit in the seat. I used to fly all the time, publicly speak, no problem. Give me the mic. Couldn't do any of it. Sleepless nights, having to sleep on a couch for 1 year in my own home because I couldn't sleep next to my wife because I felt like I was sleeping with the enemy. Now, she's going to watch this. Some of the stuff I've shared with her, but in order to be a true human being and exercise what God's given us through sobriety, looking back and I can wholeheartedly say it, I think God had me walk. He knew I was going to walk that path. He knew that I was going to fall off. She was going to fall off, but he built me in a different way that I could then share it with other people openly to maybe get them to open up themselves and heal, because healing is always an option.
Well, it's 100%. The healing takes place in folks that don't go through that exact thing or something similar. And you're like, so for an exact replica of here's what happened to me. And also, dude, you're helping thousands upon thousands of people, which is what I want to get to quickly before we wrap up here. I promise I'm not going to keep you all day. This is fucking awesome though. So you identified a gap in recovery when you were in recovery. and you said, I can fill this void, right? What was the gap that you identified that you thought yourself, with help from others, right? Help from God, that you could bridge that gap? What was it?
So I was about 8 years sober. I was sitting in a room with a bunch of alcoholics talking about recovery. And I was listening to people talk about this revolving door in treatment. And it made me think about my own experience in treatment, the multiple times that I attempted to get sober through treatment first. Treatment isn't for everybody. A lot of us need it. And I was listening and I was like, man, this is disgusting. And at that time in South Florida, there was just a tremendous amount of sickness, owners that operated businesses that had no business running a business. That was the problem. That if Maven or Max, either one of my boys, needed to go to treatment, at that point, I had such a high standard. I had yet to have that affair. So morally and ethically, no, seriously. And I say with a smile, I have to now. But at that time, my standard was so damn high in everything that I did. It's like, what if my kids need to go to treatment? I wouldn't send them there. I wouldn't send them there. And then there was a handful of good ones. So the gap was there wasn't anyone treating people like ladies and gentlemen. That was the thought that I had. So I went to my best friend and business partner, a guy that I had met when I was living in Atlanta, early years, and started making all that money. And he was my druggie friend. Yeah. Right. We used to go to strip clubs together and get high together. And I went to him. I said, hey, Ben, this is what I'm thinking about doing. I talked to my wife. This is what I'm thinking about doing. And I got started, and we started this little, small, cute little program with 3,000 square feet.
And this was Legacy Healing at the beginning.
Legacy Healing Center in the beginning. And I spent 2 years of research, development, understanding the compliance side of things, interviewing different clinical people, compliance people. I took what I learned in the financial world, right, which is like a highly regulated space, and my sales mentality, and I layered it in to Legacy, creating deliverables that would bring value to communities as well as families that would need help for their loved ones. There was no place treating ladies and gentlemen like ladies and gentlemen. They were treating people like numbers. And if my kids ever needed to go somewhere, I didn't want them to be a number. So that was like the driving core value in the very beginning. But we started off with 8 team members. We don't call them employees. We got team members, one house that could fit 12 men. It was approximately about 6,000 square feet at the time, the house. In one apartment, men only. We wouldn't take female clients, refused to do it. It's a different demographic. Until we could have perfection with 12 guys with low recidivism, repeat, we wouldn't take on women. And next thing you know, we just blew up. At that time, there were 700 treatment centers in the state of Florida, and we were one of 700. A couple of sober guys with a little business acumen. Going.
Did the guy from Atlanta get sober?
Yeah, my buddy's sober.
Okay.
I got a year and a half more than him, and
awesome. Okay.
I can. He's our CEO here at Legacy, so his office is right down the hall. And we're active owners. We're engaged. We're in groups. We're mentoring. We're active in different recovery programs. But we started off something that we thought maybe we would have 3 houses, a couple apartments, 40 beds. Maybe have 30 employees, and I'll make a good living serving families. No different than when in finance. I was helping people prepare for retirement. Now I'm just going to help people find sobriety through treatment. It took off. We are now in Ohio, New Jersey, California, and a few other states coming this year. I
saw you were in New Jersey, which is, yeah.
Yeah, we're in Cherry Hill, New Jersey.
Yeah, it's right by Philly where I grew up. So, yeah, I was like, wow, that's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll stay in Philly when I'm there, and then I'll see some family. They're off the main line. And
that's where. Where's your family there?
So a lot of them moved out, but I've got an uncle in Bryn Mawr.
Sure, yeah, Villanova. I literally, my mom is Rosemont and Bryn Mawr is the mailing address. Yeah, great area.
Yeah, great area. Good, my family's up there. And so I went from finance, like every other Effron in the family, to healthcare, which is, behavioral health, which is just wild to me. And I fell in love with the journey, man. I fell in love with watching people get better. And, so now we have 500 team members, multi locations, and growing. We want to double in size in the next 18 to 24 months. We worked with the NFL, the MLS, the MLB, NHL.
I saw the American Airlines,
but we also serve, everyday people.
Yeah.
So from athletes to actors to hip hop artists to everyday people.
And so does this work as like an inpatient treatment center? And then like what makes it different? Because I know it is different, but what makes it different from I went to a rehab and then I went to a halfway house, and this shit worked for me, right? That's my story. But what is like unique about Legacy?
It's such a loaded question because I could answer it so many ways. But if I just got to keep it real simple, it's the people. It's our team. Our team members is what separates us. With over 16,000 providers in the country, I would stack up our clinical team and our support staff against any single one of them, hands down, all day long. As a treatment provider, there's a certain amount of hours in each state that you have to, from a regulation standpoint, provide group sessions and individuals. But it's who's doing it, how credentialed they are, and how much love and support. I go back to ladies and gentlemen caring for ladies and gentlemen, and I say it at nauseum levels to my team. That's a driving thought process every day here. So if our staff is interacting that way, you got to think, man, that it's going to translate to your loved one being sent here. I was walking down the hallway before we got started to use the restroom, and this guy stopped me, and I knew that you were waiting, but he wanted to just tell me that he had never felt so much respect in all the treatment facilities that he'd been to. And that warms my heart because, again, it's the driving factor of like, what if my kids ever needed to go somewhere? I know with absolute certainty that's the differentiator. I mean, aside from organic juicing that we offer the clients, a lot of the holistic healing modalities, I have a full wellness team in each one of our locations. Here in Fort Lauderdale, we have 8 therapists for wellness alone. So They're doing everything from PT, chiropractic, brain functionality, working on the prefrontal cortex, and helping people recover from trauma, acupuncture, massage therapy. So there's that pocket. Then there's the individual therapy. We offer something that not a lot of programs offer called rapid resolution therapy, or RRT. And a lot of people suffer different traumas, right? It could be molestation, it could be rape, it could be an accident. It could be being beaten. It could be being cheated on.
Yeah.
All those traumas lay dormant and you feel them in your body. So RRT basically is rapid resolution therapy. It's meant to take it out quick. So our therapist can take out the trauma, process it with you, put it back in you, and you go, whew, I know that I had a traumatic experience, but I don't feel it. And all that can happen in your first individual session. So when I say there's like layers to it, there's a lot of cool stuff. Aside from the amenities and great houses that we offer, the loved ones.
What can somebody do if they're listening to this and they think, okay, I have somebody who needs to go to a treatment center? Because let's face it, like, now with hearing this, or if they're seeing this, they can kind of, they've laid eyes on this whole situation, like, and they're comfortable with it. What's the best way for somebody to get in the door there? Because sometimes that's not easy.
I think the best thing to do is pick up the phone and call.
Okay.
They could call.
We'll have all the contact information in the show notes.
Yeah. So, I mean, to pick up the phone and call and ask for help. I mean, I say it all the time, but cities and towns are decimated and destroyed. Families, they're either embarrassed, they don't want to talk about it, or they don't know where to turn. And I feel like as sober people, we have a responsibility. It is attraction, not promotion. But as a healthcare provider, letting people know, hey, just reach out. If it's not appropriate for us, we're going to get you to the appropriate level of care. no matter what. And I have an army behind me to support that. I feel really good about that. I think that people just got to ask the question, ask for help, and at least get the ball rolling. I was thinking about a call from yesterday. I was talking to a father whose son is 35 years old and the dad is helpless, yet he's still paying off his kids' bills. And I had to tell the dad, like, listen, you're being codependent here, like you're killing your son slowly. We got to have those type of conversations with families because the information is not out there. Smart as this guy was, he didn't realize that he's slowly killing his son by supporting him instead of helping lead him down a direction. And, beautiful story. And we don't have the time for it now, but he's going to get the help that he needs, which is an awesome thing. All because he said, hey, I need help.
Last thing, when you have somebody, whether it's your Monday night meeting or whether it's over there at Legacy and they just tell you, they say, I can't stop. Like, what's the one thing you tell folks in recovery that you feel like can put some wind in their sails and give them hope? Because, you've said it, you were hopeless and you felt hopeless at one point. Clearly you were not. But what do you tell folks that feel that way?
Man, I try to tap into something that there's two things. First is like that engagement, just like for somebody like yourself, I would talk about X's and O's and sticking a 3, right? And, and there it is. There's the whites though, right? The whites came on your face.
Yeah.
You probably had some vision of you popping a 3. And we're going to talk about that. And we're going to talk about how sobriety can feel like that. If that doesn't register, and I got to keep it real simple, my second go-to is make it to midnight. People talk about one day at a time, and for some people, that's a long time. For me, I needed to hear these words, make it to midnight. If I can just get to midnight, I can clock it an hour at a time, 30 minutes at a time. And if I get to midnight and my head is on the pillow, sober, I got another day sober. And that's how I got, since April 3rd, 2008, 15 years, is literally trudging the road to happy destiny. Sometimes all I could do was get to midnight. And it was the absolute worst day. And I didn't want to wake up and do it again, but I got my head on the pillow to midnight. Yeah. So for me, that's a powerful soundbite because it's simple. People are like, oh shit, I can get to midnight. Yeah, you can. You're going to call me at 9:00 and you're going to text me at 11:30 and I'm going to respond. And we're going to get to midnight together.
It's great shit, dude. Marc, anything else, dude?
I just hope that I delivered for you what you were hoping to get out of it. I appreciate the opportunity. When the DM came in, I was like, what? I was like, and then I'm looking at some of your people that you've interviewed, and I knew some of them, and I didn't text any of them. I was like, this is pretty awesome, and I felt honored. So I feel honored. It's cool that you knew some guys from Swampy.
Yeah.
And super cool, man. So I hope I delivered for you.
Oh,
Thank
dude, you delivered, and I just, you're a special dude just from talking to you. Thanks so much for listening to the Payoff with Pete. Once again, I'm Pete Souza. And of course, we are part of the Rogue Media Network. All kinds of good podcasts you can find at roguemedianetwork.com. And of course, you can find this podcast and all those other ones wherever you get your podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, other spots like that.
This has been a Rogue Media Network production.